Well, it is a treat and a pleasure to welcome a much talented connoisseur and aficionado of cannabis, the lovely Sara Payan. I guess she knows all things green, a writer, an educator, a social activist, host of the podcast Planted, and a cancer survivor who credits medical marijuana with helping her recover from surgery and chemotherapy. I guess we could say she talks the talk and walks the walk. And Sara, welcome to America's Cannabis Conversation. Great to be with you here today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Well, I guess we got to start with the hardcore nitty gritty stuff. Colon cancer. You're a young woman. You're still a young woman, but this must have rocked your world. And just tell me the journey and what role the medical marijuana played for you.
Sure. So when I was 36 and I was starting to get sick a lot every time I ate. And I went to the doctors and they're like, you have IBS. We'll see you when you're 50 for your colonoscopy. But colon cancer runs in my family. My great grandmother died of it. So I was worried. They gave me smooth muscle relaxants to help with the nausea because they figured it was just IBS. And that worked for a while. And then I started getting sick again. And actually, a friend of mine gave me some cannabis to use at that time. And that helped me eat and not get sick. But it was getting worse. So I went and got a second opinion. And I've never been begged to be scoped in my life, but I did. So I got my colonoscopy and they couldn't get the scope past the tumor. So I ended up at 37 years old being diagnosed with stage 3 colon cancer. And my mom is a cancer researcher. She's recently retired, but she actually did the clinical trials on FOLFOX5, which is what I ended up taking. And she was the one who had told me in the past that for her patients, she had used cannabis to help with nausea and getting people eating again. So I was just looking at it from that perspective. I didn't realize all the things it could do. I would have done a lot of things differently. But when I was going through my journey with cancer, that's when I got my medical cannabis card because this was pre-legalization. And I did use it instead of my medications because things like opiates for pain or the anti-nausea drugs, one of the side effects is constipation. And when you're going through colon cancer, that can actually kill you because you can end up with sepsis. So I pretty much, I replaced my opiates and anti-nausea drugs with cannabis. And then when I got done, I decided I didn't want to go back to the office after 14 years of being in management, in nonprofit, and before that in the private sector. I decided to go back to school and get my master's. And that was when I took the job at the Apothecarium because I really just wanted, you know how it is, years of managing people, and you just really want to have something really simple while you're going through school. And I really thought of it as being like working at a bookstore or a coffee shop, never realizing that as I was going to school for psych, that I was actually finding my career at that time.
Mm-hmm. Well, so glad that you're here doing well.
Thank you.
The plants, not pills mantra is really resonating for so many people. And for you, it may have been a game changer.
It was. I had no idea. I understood that there were some medicinal benefits, but I really got it then. And then when I started working with the plant more and working with individuals, because I have over 16,000 hours of experience with human beings in cannabis, and it's not for everybody. But the things that it does to help people so that they can get off of certain medications and just get on with their lives and have a quality of life that they may not have had even with medication, most of the time it's much better, is amazing. And that's not to say that I have anything against traditional allopathic medicine, because we have to look at our health and medicine in more of a holistic way where it all comes into play, like more of a full picture.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned the Apothecarium. For those not in the know, it's a very well-regarded and venerable dispensary that I guess there are 6 outlets in San Francisco and beyond. And you're the public education officer.
Yes.
And means exactly what?
So I do all the forward-facing, public-facing education for our company. We have 3 dispensaries in San Francisco, 1 in Berkeley, 1 in Capitola, and we also have them in Nevada, Pennsylvania, in New Jersey. So I don't do a lot on the East Coast, although a lot of East Coast people attend my classes, because you can attend my classes anywhere in the world through Zoom. Every other Thursday, I do an hour public education class with Q&A, and every week it's different. We have things like this week we're doing cannabis, sleep, depression, and anxiety. I do a class for cancer and cannabis. I do one on the non-euphorics. We're doing one on cannabis and athletics next month. And the two that have been the most popular besides the sleep, depression, and anxiety, which is something that we've really needed help with in the past year, has been women in cannabis. So we talk about the difference with women's bodies and estrogen levels, and that determines how they react to THC. And then sex in cannabis, which has been a really interesting one because a lot of people have come on that, and it's interesting because for me, and maybe it's because I'm a nurse's child, like there's no weird questions. So people are a little bit, well, should I ask this? And I'm like, ask me. No, cannabis can't be Viagra, but it can help get you in the mood. Let's talk about it.
That's great. Yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about some of the hot topics or the hot button issues that either misconceptions or the most intriguing aspects of some of those conversations.
Well, one of the things that I really like, we talk about, these populations of people and who are the latest that come to cannabis. And one of the ones that we hear about are, seniors. They're the largest growing group of cannabis users. And I teach a seniors in cannabis class. And the first thing I always say in class is, all right, people, I know that they're saying that about you, but we all know that that's not true. It's that, you either used cannabis, you knew somebody who did, you were in the know, but you also were living in the time where the war on drugs was serious and you kept your business to yourself. And I always get applause for that one because, it's just really, it's an interesting thing. Like, I almost feel like it, in some ways, it's like we all need support around it. We all have different levels of expertise, but let's not infantilize people and make it like, oh, they're babes in the woods. They don't know anything about this. Well, you know something about it. You've known somebody who's used it if you haven't used it yourself. Now let's have a conversation about you and your body and what your expectations are. So That's one of the things I do when I talk to medical professionals too, because they'll ask me, what ratio and what dosage of that ratio would you use for whatever they're mentioning. And I'll say it's not as easy as that, because when you come to my class, you read, an amazing text on cannabis, or you go through research, what they're reporting back is how the majority of human beings respond. And we're walking chemistry experiments. And the thousands of people I've seen, I've had 4 people who have had highly unpleasant psychoactive experiences on, high ratio of CBD. So it really is about setting the stage for creating that safe container for experimentation. And that's a lot of the stuff that I impress upon the medical practitioners that I do lectures with.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating when you're talking to professional medical experts, and you are the cannabis expert. How do you find the receptivity, or do you still find there's either a preponderance of ignorance or, I don't know, skepticism? How would you characterize that?
There are more and more people who are open to it. It's a lot different than it was when I started almost 10 years ago in the industry. And it was really hard because we'd get people coming in with recommendations and we wouldn't be able to get the recommendations verified by the doctors because they didn't want to have that conversation. It really depends on like who's the head of the medical practice, as far as like it's more of a trickle down with the culture for that practice. But I find that more and more people are curious about it, especially because their patients are coming to them with questions or letting them know that they're using it. So they want to know more so that they can support their patients better. There will always be physicians who will have, issues with cannabis because of the stigma. The stigma has been extraordinarily strong. It's been very impactful, but especially with a lot of the younger doctors, there's a lot more openness, but that's, not across the board. And I found that physicians and nurses of all ages have been really open to having the conversation. It's really about your, the stigma and your personal indoctrination around that.
Well, it is great that we're making some progress and tearing down some walls. But let's get into the weed of the weeds. How
Sure.
about the CBD phenomenon, which is blowing up, but so many people are not really versed in the distinctions of broad spectrum, full spectrum, or CDB. Well, just the lingo of it. So why don't you just give us a little broad brush on that?
Yeah, sure. I actually wrote an article for CannabisNow on this. So when we're looking at broad spectrum, it's going to have a full, it'll have all the cannabinoids and terpenes with the along with CBD, except for THC. And when we look at full spectrum, it has the full complement of cannabinoids and terpenes, including THC. So when we look at full spectrum, we'll be looking at the different ratios of CBD to THC most of the time. And broad spectrum is something that you can purchase outside of a dispensary. It'll have CBD, it'll have some lesser cannabinoids, and it'll have terpenes as well.
Yeah, now you can topically apply it for arthritis or aches and pains, headaches, whatever it might be, and you can ingest it. So what about the distinction there? Because again, I think a lot of people are overwhelmed by all the newness of it, and they're flying blind.
Sure. Well, a lot of us in the industry joke about CBD being like, have you ever seen the film My Big Fat Greek Wedding?
Sure.
And the dad's spraying Windex on everything?
Yes, it's for everything.
It's a pretty joke.
Spray the window.
CBD will save your marriage. It'll wash your car. It'll do everything. And it's, it's much more nuanced than that because, as far as like arthritis, it depends on the type of arthritis. Like if you have things that are creating inflammation or nerve pain, CBD is going to help you. Chances are you're going to want to have some THC in there because THC is what behaves as the analgesic. But when you're using any sort of cannabis or hemp product topically, unless you're dealing with something that's transdermal, there's not going to be any euphoric effects. And then when you take something internally, it's going to be more systemic. So you're going to get more relief throughout your body. But CBD is better for things like anxiety. I have neuropathy left over from chemo. So I use a 2-to-1 CBD to THC ratio instead of my pain medication to help with that. You can use it for inflammation, certain types of pain, anxiety. I know people who get great relief using high CBD ratios to help with things like migraines. So there's a lot of different things it can do, but it doesn't do everything. And it's not necessarily going to help with every pain. And a lot of people use it for sleep. And unless you have pain that CBD can address, that's keeping you up, or maybe you have a really busy, anxious mind, chances are CBD isn't going to help you as much as having a THC to CBD ratio.
Sure. And what about this CBD isolate? That's a whole nother world.
Isolate is an interesting thing because, some people say that it works well for them, and I'm never going to knock that because I'm always leaning in. It's like I'm constantly proven wrong by different body chemistries. Like I used to say, CBD by itself doesn't do anything. Well, that's not true. For people who are THC naive or can't have THC metabolites, for them, there are some things that it may help with. It may help with, anxiety and stuff like that. But CBD by itself doesn't do a whole lot. What we are looking at is we want to have the synergy of the cannabinoids and terpenes working together, which is what we refer to as the entourage effect. Because it's kind of like when pharmacists and researchers realized that THC helped with appetite. So they decided, we're going to take this Delta-9 THC and we're going to synthesize it. We're going to make Marinol. Well, Marinol by itself doesn't work really well for a lot of people. My mom was doing cancer research in Dallas while I was going through treatment, and I didn't want to travel with my cannabis. So I got a prescription for Marinol, and I basically lost my weekend with my mom because I was just a crabby, groggy mess the whole time. And the reason is because you see researchers saying, this is the active ingredient. This is exactly what we need. We're going to take this out. The rest of it's trash. but they're not realizing that all the other components of the plant actually work together to create the effects. So
Right.
CBD isolate isn't necessarily useless, but it's not going to be as useful as something that has the full complement of cannabinoids and terpenes.
Yeah. Now you mentioned Delta 9. Can you dive into that a little bit more? Because Delta 8 was a big hot topic recently.
Sure.
And for the uninitiated and the non-aficionado, where are we going with this? What does that mean? Because there's a legality question too in states that do not permit recreational marijuana use.
Right. And also, when you're looking at the states that don't have recreational cannabis use, you're also looking at the one thing that they're not actually watching the products and regulating them. So Delta 9 THC is what we normally just refer to as THC. Delta 8 is a cannabinoid that has a little bit more of a fuzzy, buzzy body feel. So for people who are nervous about getting paranoid or anxious using THC, Delta 8 normally doesn't create that. Now, the Delta 8 that we're seeing in unregulated markets where there isn't recreational cannabis available is synthesized from CBD. And and this is a personal opinion, but I'm really not into synthesizing cannabinoids. I think it's dangerous in some ways. It's not regulated. When we're looking at products that we're purchasing outside of a dispensary, whether it be Delta 8 or CBD, we really have to be careful with who's growing it and who's making it, because hemp and cannabis are the same plant. They're bioaccumulators. Whatever they grow it in, whatever they grow it around, whatever they grow it with is going to be leached by that plant. And in turn, we ingest that. And when we're in markets where there's no regulations, there's no testing for heavy metals, molds, mildews, funguses, and even the cannabinoid counts. So it's not necessarily what they say it is, and it can be harmful if there are adulterants in it. So I always tell people, because I have clients in my private practice that are in markets where cannabis isn't legal and they want to use CBD. It's not that you can't use these products, but you want to make sure that you're working with a company that can actually give you a certificate of analysis.
Mm-hmm.
And for example, I had somebody come to my class when I was still doing classes in person the other year. And at the end of class, it was a whole family. And I thought maybe they had somebody who was ill. It was my class on the non-euphorics. And they came up and they asked me, and they said, so is CBD the plant or is it the seed? And here's the thing. They had a CBD company. They were selling multi-level marketing CBD. So they really didn't even know about what they were selling. So you really need to be discerning when you're looking at these products.
Well, you're just a fountain of information and great stuff. No wonder why the Green Market Report voted you among the top 100 most important women in weed last year. What an honor.
It was an honor.
Yeah, awesome. Well, speaking of women in weed, I love reading about the suffragettes, know.
Yeah.
What a great little riff on the suffragette movement of women in cannabis, which is sort of, I don't want to say that glass ceiling is as strong or as prevalent there as it is in other places, but I guess we'd have to acknowledge it probably is.
It is. I think that prior to legalization, we had many more female-led companies. But since legalization, we are seeing a lot of the patterns that we see in other industries where there aren't as many women as there should be available. But a lot of it is the high price for entry into the market and the fact that sometimes it's harder for women to actually get funding than it is for men when you go up to pitch. So we have a lot to do around that, and a lot more conversations to have about female leadership in companies. But that being said, we have a really strong community of women in cannabis that really help uplift one another and support one another and share resources. So I think we're seeing the beginnings of a lot of change with that. I'm really hoping that this leaks out into other industries too, because as a burgeoning industry, we've been around, cannabis has been around for a long time. The movement's been around for a long time, and people have been selling weed forever. But as an organized industry, we have this unique opportunity to change the way we do business by having more female leadership, by creating more opportunities and upholding, Black and brown communities for leadership in their organizations, and being able to not only work in the industry, but own own companies, and also look at how we can be compassionate capitalism, how we can actually have abundance in our lives and in our companies, but also work to serve our communities as well.
Yeah, you can have a higher consciousness and a higher bank value at the same time. They're not mutually exclusive. And you talk about women in cannabis because many more women are purchasing, using, growing. And I don't know, you touched upon it earlier about if you're dealing with menstruation issues or menopause issues or any number of hormonal issues. I mean, do I want to go to a guy to find that out with an expert like yourself in the industry? Come on, I'm going to go to a woman if I'm a woman with those concerns.
It is more comfortable to talk to a woman about those concerns. And that's one thing that was interesting when I started out behind the bar in the dispensary, and there weren't a lot of women working in dispensaries when I started. And that was one thing that we heard from a lot of women is it's really nice to be able to come in on a day where I'm not feeling good, I've got cramps, and I can talk to you about what's going to help me. And it's really wonderful to see women embracing cannabis use, because when I've used cannabis, I started using cannabis when I was 13, and I've taken breaks through the years. It was more of an occasional thing, but like when I used to go to parties, it wouldn't really be a lot of women stepping out to have a joint. It'd be like me, maybe one other girl and a bunch of dudes,
Yeah, right.
So it's nice to see that women are understanding that it's really helpful for a lot of things, whether they're dealing with, bad cramps or really like a perimenopause or menopause. And it's funny when I have the conversations about the levels of estrogen in our bodies and how that affects how we deal with THC. Like when women are ovulating, they're more sensitive to THC than they are around their periods because of how estrogen flows through our bodies. And then I'll have, older women being like, oh, this doesn't apply to me. I haven't had a period in years. I'm in menopause. I'm like, you still have estrogen, girl. Right. You're still alive. You haven't given up. You still have peaks and flows. And it's really a call for us to be more in touch with our bodies and really understand, because women aren't really educated on how their bodies work. We're just kind of a wait and see sort of thing. Oh, you started your period. Great. Let's see how it happens. How's your pregnancy? Oh, everybody's different. Yeah. Menopause, you don't know that you're in it till you're deep in it. It's like there's a lot there.
Yeah. Well, you just been awesome. Great catching up with you, Sara. We'll link our web where we can find you and hear you on your Planted podcast, which I've really enjoyed. We turn the tables. You go from interviewer to interviewee, but you're a rock star, and awesome work and continued great success. Sara Payan with us today on the W420 Radio Network. You want to hear it again, or you want to hear some excerpts? W420 Radio Network /archive. I'm Rich Walkoff. Thanks for listening, and thank you, Sara. And we'll be right back.